Hello! I hope you watched my last video, because it gives you all the information that you need to jump right into this one. But hey, there's no guarantee that you've watched it, or not guarantee that you've watched any of my videos. For those uninformed, hello, my name is Donter Collects, and I want to catalog every set released in the run of the Pokemon TCG, focusing mainly on the artists. But if you already knew all that, then let's get into EX Sandstorm. So, last time, I said the reverse pattern would change up quite a bit, but we're not quite there yet, so just a few more sets and that will be true. The set features 100 total cards and was released in September of 2003 on the 17th. But let's just talk about the trainers now, though. And while we do that, we'll work our way through this deep, dark forest that I find myself in. The first card is a Multi-Energy by Takumi Akabane, which shows an energy splitting off into multiple different colors. And then we have the Mysterious Fossil, a reprint by Keiji Kinobuchi. Ryo Ueda illustrated the claw and root fossil, which show off the respective fossils. Rare Candy is an image of the candy with the yellow background, and the double full heel shows the full heel with lines traveling behind it. Finally, for trainers, Ken Sugimori worked on the Lynette's Net Search, which shows Lynette's reflection in a computer screen, and the Wally's Training, which shows Wally and Ralts happily emoting. The trainers in Sandstorm are very few, but they are very effective in conveying simplicity and effectivity, especially considering the low amount of trainers. But, firstly for artists, we'll talk about Ai Kusube, who worked on a mere 3 cards for this set, being the Firo, which looks suspiciously at the camera, and the Spiro, which looks down as its beak opens slowly, and then finally the Duskull, which looks to be covering its own face with its arms. The shading on these cards that Kusube did for the set is extremely intense, and we haven't seen Kusube since Skyridge, so it's nice to see him again. In Sandstorm, Kyoku Umamoto only received 2 cards. Firstly, the Ilamis, which flies next to a tree, with a nice white outline around it, and the Volbeat, and a deep red sun sets in the background. These cards are good depictions of Umamoto's style. It's almost simplistic, but the backgrounds complement the main eye candy, which are the cards themselves, and cards by Umamoto are just enjoyable to look at, due to the amount of character that the artist tries to put behind each one of their cards that they illustrate, always trying something new and interesting. Ah, it looks like we made it out of the evil weeping forest, and it's finally time to get to the... Whoa, this place is pretty dusty. I can hardly see at all. Well, I'm gonna have to get through these dusty dunes before I can really do something else. This is gonna suck. How am I gonna find my way out? Let's just move on to the next artist. The next artist that we'll be talking about is Naoki Kimura, who worked on 3 cards for EX Sandstorm, starting with the Pichu, which looks around the corner as a storm brews up, and the dark sky swirls around the Pichu, as the Pichu looks very inquisitive. The Quilava, which looks to the left with the same dreary sky, and a swirl of clouds can be seen in the background. And then finally for Kimura, the Cyndaquil, which is in the same environment as the other 2 cards, but the area around the Cyndaquil is illuminated by fire that it breathes out. Kimura's style has always been interesting to me, and I just really love the way that they create their cards. It feels like they're filled with intuition, always trying to invoke some kind of feeling out of the holder. Now, we can talk about Koki Saito, who worked on a good handful of cards for Sandstorm. The Almastar, which wades through the swampy waters with some deep red leaves covering the Pokemon. The Sandslash, which busts through some rocks, looking down, which looks very dynamic. The Electabuzz, which is mid-action as it reaches around. The Elekid, which jumps around with an evil grin. The Eevee, which prances around with ruins behind it. The Natu, which looks up with some Murkrow flying in the background. The Ammonite, which swims through the similar-looking swamp to the Amistar, and looks curious. The Psyduck, which lands face first on the floor, looking mildly concerned, which is quite funny. And then finally, the Sandshrew, which stances up and looks to the right, which looks very dynamic and interesting. The more Saito cards I see, the more I warm up to the art style. I like a lot of these cards, especially considering they're just commons and uncommons, apart from the Amistar, which is actually a non-holo rare. But the next artist that I wanted to talk about is Ken Sugimori, who didn't actually get any holo cards, but still received a little chunk of cards. The cards that they had all have these weird light outlines around them, but I think out of all the ones that Sugimori worked on in this set, I just really enjoy the Shroomish, mainly because they use the scenery around the Shroomish to tell a little story as it looks up with the default pose. The Whalmer is cute as well, and Sugimori also did the Shift Tree non-holo, which is a non-remarkable card to be honest, but that's okay. Overall, the cards that Sugimori worked on for the set are a little less egregious than the ones from the last set, but still aren't remarkable enough to spend a lot of time talking about. But I never said that Sugimori was a bad artist. That just means that there's a lot of really good artists in this set. Oh, thankfully, the dust is all cleared up now, and I can finally see the dunes that we find ourselves in. When you can take it in, it's quite beautiful, isn't it? This is quite the convenient place for me, because I just wanted to talk about all the artists who received a holographic card in the set, so this works out perfectly. Starting with Kagemaru Himeno, who worked on a whole 8 cards for Sandstorm, starting with the Wingull, which fly with a pack, with a deep sky and a river. the Skitty, who play around with the dark sand dunes, with the moon in the background, the Wynot, which looks up as it smiles, and cacti and dunes surround it. The Pelipper is an upgraded Wingull, as it sits on a branch the same river can be seen. The Azurill, who bound around in the dunes and look concerned as a nice lens flash can be seen. The Kecleon, which extends its tongue as it walks through the dunes, looking back at the camera. The Umbreon, which stands up ready to attack as the palm trees and more dunes can be seen around it. And finally for Himeno, the Sangoose, which looks to the left as one of its claws lay on the side. Himeno is a very talented artist whose cutesy style really lends itself to Pokemon like Umbreon and Azurill, but their style is just evolving over time, and is really coming into their own at this point in the TCG, and I'm excited to talk about more of them in the future. The next artist that I choose to cover is Tomokazu Kamiya, who worked on 3 cards for Sandstorm, being the full Lotad evolution line, starting with a Lotad, which looks forwards towards the dunes in the background, as it sits still in a pond. The Lombre shows it outside of the pond as the sun sets in the background, and the reeds from the Lotad grew into full tall grass. And finally, the Ludicolo Hollow, which extends its arms outwards and looks towards the camera with a suspicious glare as it's surrounded by other Lotad and Lombre, which looks quite cute. And the background looks to be nighttime. This card is really nice, and so are all of the Tomokazu cards, which always exude some special unique feelings that a lot of other artists are unable to grasp with their cards, due to Tomokazu being able to use the basis of a Pokemon and altering it heavily with their style, which just makes it more fun for these cards and it makes them more unique. The next artist we'll be covering is Hajime Kusajima, who worked on a whopping 10 cards for Sandstorm, starting with the Ralts, which has this very nice, soft, sketchy style that looks awesome, where it stands next to some trees. And then the Growlithe, which lays down on top of a table with some tea and the window next to it open. The Curlia, which stands atop a set of leaves looking over to the right with some nice flowers on the top left. The Vaporeon, which sits on a top of lily pads looking to the left as the moon illuminates the area around it. The Golduck, which primes its claws and looks over as it jumps up from the water below it. The Arcanine, which looks majestic, in a similar way to the one from Skyridge does, but this one looks very traditionally Japanese inspired, and is very gorgeous. To start the hollows out, the Solrock, which looks at the camera at around a 45-degree angle with a nice subtle green and black background. This Viper, which seems to be fighting a Zangoose, which covers the moon and lunges at this Viper, which looks absolutely stunning. I just like the pose that it's in, and the dynamism of the card. The Sableye, which hides in a gemstone cave as it looks up and to the left, and colored lights can be seen all around it. And then finally, the Lunatone, which looks up and shows the Lunatone floating above some ruins, which looks very nice. The reason that I like Kusajima's cards so much is due to the fact that they make every single card really feel unique, and there's just never one style when it comes to their cards, always trying to change up their own artwork between Pokemon. The next artist we're talking about is Midori Harada, and we're going to start with the Onyx, which slithers around the dunes as it looks upwards. The Ekans, which looks over with a devious glare and dead trees in the back. The Duskull, which waves its arms and looks over to the left, with spikes in the back. The Cacnea, which holds onto some kind of rope with clotheslines in the back. The Xatu, which extends its arms outwards and looks forwards atop a hill. The Lileep, which waddles around some ruins and looks up. The Delcatty, which looks back at the camera and sits on some simplistic ground. The Baltoy, which looks over as it enters a cave. The Arbok, which slithers around the floor with its mouth wide open and the sun in the back. The Steelix, which is just gorgeous as it floats upwards and looks up. The Flareon Hollow, which is also standing with the dunes as it whips its tail around. The Dusclops, which stands in front of a brick wall, which looks awesome. Very detailed. Then, finally, the Cradily, which stands near some crusty rocks as its neck brings down its head and it looks towards the camera. Honestly, Harada's artwork in the set is also gorgeous, and it's amazing to look at these Pokemon that we're starting to get to know, and some that we've known for a while, just with amazing artworks. Harada's style has these really nice outlines and shading to make the cards look gritty and detailed, sometimes purposefully not using outlines to give them more emphasis. Our next artist is Atsuko Nishida, whose cute style always draws me in, starting with the Seedot, which sits down next to some very detailed sand, the Cacnea, which waves its arms around on some sand as well, the Aron, which lays down and looks up with some leaves above it, the Nuzleaf, which covers its face with its hands as it trudges through the sand, the Lyron, which opens its mouth and screams upwards, surrounded by grass, the Kabuto, which glides along the water, and wavy effects can be seen all around it. The Braylon whips its tail around and looks around. The Wobbuffet, which slaps its tail down and opens up its mouth. The Shiftry, which looks forwards with its arm barely covering up its face. The Jolteon, which looks forwards as it stands on some dunes, which looks extremely spiky. And finally, the Cacturn Hollow, which holds up its arms as birds fly in the background, dimmed out in black. Nishida's artwork is always fantastic. The soft shading style that they use mixed with the light to no outlines makes the cards pop and makes the cards look fantastic as well. One of our final artists is Mitsuhiro Rita, working on a whopping 14 cards for Sandstorm. And first, we'll start off with the Zigzagoon, which prances around some cacti and taller grass, looking to the right. The Trapinch, which looks upwards, starstruck at the deep night sky. The Pikachu, which looks over to the left as the sun rises, standing on some dunes. The Marill, which swims under the water underneath some trees, smiling. The Lotad, which sits on some cracked arid ground, looking dehydrated. The Dunsparce, which looks around as it wades through the dunes. The Murkrow, which flaps its wings purposefully and maintains very good speed as the mountains and loose feathers can be seen in the foreground and background. The Linoon, which dashes quickly along the desert. The Lombre, which seems to have found the water, as it looks up to the sky and sun reflects on the water. The Azumarill, which gets covered by the shadow of a palm tree, with another one in the back. And the Pokemon looks down onto the water. The Anorith, which emerges from the water, looking upwards. The Espeon, which flicks its hair around as the scene shifts with it. The Mawile, which looks upwards and stands on some loose sand. And finally, the Armaldo, which stands up and looks to the right, the vast desert behind it. Arita's style is very detailed, and the artworks are always giving you something to look at, and it gives you not only a basis of what the Pokemon should look like, but it also makes you see how they would do what they do every day, or it gives you a more detailed look about how they live their daily lives. And finally, without any reason to beat around the bush like the last video, we'll talk about what gives the EX and EX Sandstorm its name, being the EX Pokemon cards. And we'll start with the Aerodactyl EX by Hikaru Koike, and the next ones are also going to be by him. The Aerodactyl can be seen flying through the deep red swirling inferno, which looks gorgeous. It's nice to see a Pokemon like Aerodactyl get some love, and this card makes the Pokemon look menacing and dark. Next is the Aggron EX, which can be seen stands up and shouting, lashing out, with red flying all around it and outside of its area, which looks amazing. I just love how the dark shading is used to emphasize the weight and aura of this Pokemon. The next EX is Gardevoir, but this EX is much lighter in comparison to the other ones. This works well, with the bright purple backing of the Psychic type, and this one shows Gardevoir singing its song, with flashing lights in the background, which looks awesome. And then, the Typhlosion EX, which looks phenomenal. It's nice to see a Gen 2 starter get some love even before Gen 1 Pokemon, and this card looks awesome. I love how Typhlosion is shaded to be very dark, with deep red and black background illuminating off of it, and I think it looks amazing. Our next artist is Ryo Ueda, who worked on a couple EX cards as well. Firstly, the Kabutops EX, which shows Kabutops looking straight at the camera, with a swirling red vortex in the background, and shadows cover half of its face as the scythe is extended outwards. The Raichu EX, which charges electricity and a ball of plasma can be seen forming around the Pokemon as it primes its attack. And the final EX for Uedo is the Wailord EX, which floats through the sky, looking at the camera. Once again, the shading on this card is quite awesome, and it's cool to see a Pokemon like Wailord get a nice looking EX card. Overall, Sandstorm is an awesome set with some phenomenal artwork. If you ask me what my favorite cards were, I could keep going and going. But first, we'll start with the EX Pokemon, and I personally love the Typhlosion and the Kabutops EX. And then, for holo cards, I'd pick the Flareon, Seviper, Ludicolo, and the Sableye. And then, for non-holos, the Arcanine, Espeon, Steelix, Vaporeon, Azumarill, both of the Duskull cards, the one by Harada and the one by Kusube, the Eevee, Ralts, and the Marill. And there are probably many more that I would pick as well. But, like I said, I have a lot of favorites for the set though. The artwork at this point is just seriously top notch, and the setup for the sets is all still simplistic, but it's still awesome. Join me in my next video where I cover the next set in the EX era, being EX Dragon.